I'm Brent. I've been working in the film industry for over a decade, building software for artists. Buttons are one of the most frequently used things that you will find in interfaces. So in this tutorial, we're going to cover all of the common things that you're going to need to know to work with QPushButtons. The code and a full tutorial going over everything that I talk about today is going to be linked down in the description, so feel free to check it out. I'll also have chapter markers down in the description so you can skip around to whatever parts you need. One quick thing, I'm working in a virtual environment. If you haven't worked with virtual environments before, I highly suggest you look at my tutorial, which is going to be linked above as well as down in the description. Now let's get to pushing some buttons. I already have some starter code up here, so let's quickly go over it. I've got some imports at the top. And next, I have a main window class, which subclasses the Q main window. This is just there so that we can create a window and put the things that we want within it. And then down here, we define a main function, which just creates an application and then launches the main window. And then down here, we just run the main function. So before we can actually get to adding a QPushButton, one of the first things that we're going to need to do is we're going to have to add a layout. I'm going to be creating a bunch of different buttons as well as a label in this tutorial. And so for us to be able to add all of them and to make it work well with the window, we're going to be adding this VBox layout. And I'm not going to cover in depth this layout. I'm going to have a tutorial on layouts in near future, so if it already exists, I'll be linking it up above as well as down in the description. But all you really need to know is that we have this layout, and all of this layout is in charge of is putting our widgets, basically our buttons and our labels in this tutorial, on the screen and to where all of those widgets actually go. In our case, we're going to be using a VBox layout, which means that all of our widgets are going to be stacked vertically. So what we'll need to do is we're going to need to import the QVBox layout. So we've imported our QVBox layout. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to need to create that layout. So we're going to do main layout is equal to QVBox layout. To be able to add our layout to our window, we're going to be creating a widget. So we are going to need to import QWidget. So we've imported QWidget, and then we're going to create a widget. It's just going to be called widget. And then we're going to be setting the layout of that widget. So widget dot set layout, and then we're going to do the main layout that we've created. And then to set the widget as our main widget for the main window that we have, we're going to be doing self dot set central widget, and we're going to give it widget. So again, all we're doing is we're creating this VBox layout, which is going to be the main layout that is used in our main window. For us to be able to use that layout, we need to set the layout on a specific widget. And so in this case, we're just creating a empty QWidget and then setting that layout and then setting the central widget for the main window. And this just is going to allow us to create a bunch of widgets and have them vertically stacked. And if we go ahead and run this code, so we're going to do Python main.py, we should get an empty window. Yeah, we have an empty window here. Now that we've gotten all of that boilerplate setup done, let's get to the actual QPushButtons. So let's create a QPushButton. To create the QPushButton, we're going to need to import QPushButton first. And so we're going to do QPushButton. And there we go. And then we are going to create the QPushButton under the main layout. So we're going to do self.button1 is equal to QPushButton. And we are going to pass it button 1. And then lastly, we're going to do main layout dot add widget self dot button 1. Okay, so let's go over these 2 lines that we just added. So we created a QPushButton, and we passed to the QPushButton the button 1 string. And so this is the string that's going to be seen in that button. And then all we did is we added the button 1 to the layout, so it's going to show up in our main window. And so we did main layout dot add widget button 1. And so if we run this code with python main.py again, you can see here that we get a window with a button, and that button says button 1 because that's the text that we put there. So we can press it and it does nothing. So that's the next thing that we're going to work on, is we're going to be working on callbacks. So making this button actually do something. So let's close out of this window and get to making that button actually do something. So to more easily show that the button actually did something, what we're going to do is we're going to add a label to our main window. And so we need to first import QLabel. I've got a full tutorial on everything you need to know about QLabels, and you can find that above as well as linked down in the description. But in the simplest terms, a QLabel is a place for us to put text on the screen. It's generally for labeling things. In our case, it's going to be there to show that we actually pressed the button and that we got a result from that. So we imported QLabel, and the thing that we're going to do is we are going to add a QLabel to our main window. And so we're going to self.label is equal to QLabel. And we are also going to be creating a variable, and I'm going to call it count. So to show that our QPushButton works, what we're going to do is every time that we push the button, we're going to increase the number, specifically count, and we're going to have that update the label. So the QLabel is going to show whatever count we have. And that count is going to be however many times we have pushed the button. And so I'm going to pass the string of self.count to QLabel. And what that means is it's going to show whatever number count currently is. So in this case, it is 0. And so let's add that label to the main window. So we are going to do main layout dot add widget self dot label. And so if we run it right now, we should see the QLabel under the button. Yes, we do. You can see here we've got the button and the QLabel that shows 0. But our button, it still isn't doing anything. So let's get to the actual having the button actually update the number on that label. So if we go back here, we're going to create a callback function for when we press that button. We are going to do self.button1.clicked .connect, and then we're going to call a function that we haven't written yet. So we're going to do self.button1press. So we are passing clicked.connect self.button1 pressed. And so we're going to write this function self.button1 pressed for what we want to happen when button 1 is pressed. You can name that function whatever you want. You just need to pass it into clicked.connect. So let's create that function. So we're going to do def button one press. And then the thing that we want to do is we want to update the label as well as the count. So we are going to do self.count plus equals 1. So every time you press the button, we're going to increase the count, and then we're going to update the label to show that count. So self.label.set text, and we're going to do the string of self.count. And then we can run it. You can see here we ran it, and if we press the button, you can see that the label increases the count. So that is how we have a callback for when a person presses the button. So the next thing we're going to talk about is toggleable buttons. In PyQt, they also call these checkable buttons. So these are buttons that have two different states, on or off. These can be useful in a bunch of different applications. And so I'm going to show you how to have these buttons that can be toggle on, toggle off. So let's go back here and get to the code. So we're going to create a new button. We're going to do self.button2 is equal to QPushButton. And then for the text of the button, we're going to do toggled off, click to toggle on. Then we are going to add a callback similar to what we did previously. I'm just going to copy from the previous time, and we're just going to change this to button2.clicked and button2 pressed. And before we define that button press, we need to set the button as checkable. So we're going to do self.button2.set checkable, and we're going to set that to true. And then let's add the button to the layout before we forget. So main layout.add widget self.button2. And now we're going to define what the button does on press. So I'm just going to copy this really quickly. We're going to put it down here, and then we're going to change it to be button2 because that's what we called the callback. And what we are going to do is we are going to check to see if the button is toggled on. So if button self dot button 2 dot is checked, and we're going to do an else here. And so if the button is checked, we are going to set the text of the button so that we know that it's checked. So we're going to do self dot button dot set self.button2, and then I'm going to go back up to here and copy what we had previously for the text and throw it in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this to be toggled on, click to toggle off, and then we're going to do the opposite here. So self.button2 dot set text, and yeah, here we are. So what this function is doing is it's checking to see if the button is checked, and by checked meaning toggled on. If it is, then we're going to update the text of the button to say toggled on, click to toggle off. If it isn't checked, then it's going to say toggled off, click to toggle on. And so let's run the code to see that. So if we run main.py after clearing the screen, python main.py, you can see here we have this new button here, and it says toggled off, click to toggle on. And so if we click it, you can see here that it's toggled on. And you can see it also changed the state of the button to be blue. And so if we click it again, you can see that it's once again toggled off. And we also have the regular button 1 that increases the count of the label. So that is a toggleable button or a checkable button. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to show you how to disable a button. It's extremely common to need to disable a button so a user can't press it. So let's get to that. In this example, we're going to be changing up what our toggle button does. And what we're going to instead make it do is we're going to make it instead disable or enable button 1. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to update the text of button 2. And we're going to say disable button 1. And then we're going to go down to the function that we have, and we are going to update it. So the first thing that we're going to update is we're going to update the text. So if it is checked, what we're going to do is we're going to put enable button 1, and then we're going to do the actual disabling of button 1, which is self.button1 dot set enabled is equal to false. So the set enabled function takes a Boolean. In this case, we're passing it false so that we disable button 1. And then if it is not checked, we are going to put for the text disable button 1. And then we're going to do the opposite. We are going to set enabled to true. So once again, this checks to see if button 2 is checked. It sets the text of button 2 to enable button 1. So the user knows that if they click this button, it will enable button 1. And then it sets button 1 to disabled. And if it is not checked, we are going to set the text to disable button 1, and we're going to enable button 1. Sounds kind of confusing, but it will make sense once we actually get to running it. So let's just run it so you can see what we mean. So if we run python main.py, you can see here we have the button updated to say disable button 1. And you can see that button 1 is currently enabled. You can still press it. And so if we press on the button that says disable button 1, you can see here that button 1 is grayed out. I can try pressing it, but it actually doesn't press and it doesn't update the label. And you can see here that the bottom button is toggled. And you can see it also says enable button 1. And so if you click enable button 1, it enables button 1 and you can click on it like you usually can. So that's how you enable or disable a button. And it is also how you set the text of a button. And lastly, for fun, what we're going to do is we are going to have buttons that have pictures in them. So let's get to that. So let's close out the window and get to adding our button with an image in it. You can see up here that we already have an image in the same directory that the code exists and that we're running the code from. And it's called playbutton arrowhead.png. For us to add an image to a button, we're going to have to do a new import, and we're going to be importing QIcon. So it is going to be from PyQt5.qtGUI import QIcon. And we are going to create a new button, self.button3 is equal to QPushButton. And we're not pass anything to QPushButton, so it's going to be an empty button for the moment. And then we're going to create an icon. So icon is equal to Q icon. And then we're going to pass it the path to the image that we're going to be using. We can just pass it play button arrowhead.png. If you were going to be making this code for others to be using, we would handle the pathing to the images completely differently. But for this example, we are just going to do the simple way. If you want me to go into more detail of how you manage images in a application that you're going to be giving to other users, please let me know down in the comments. I am happy to make a tutorial on how to do that, but it's a little bit complicated if you want to do it correctly. So it's outside the scope of this tutorial, but for now, this is just going to be how I'm going to do it. It's just going to know that we are running it from this current directory, and that's why it's working. So we have the icon. And so to add the icon to the button, we are going to do self.button3.set icon, and then pass it the icon. And then all we need to do is add the button to the main layout. So main layout.add widget self.button3. And that should be all we need to be able to have a button that we created that has a specific image in it. In this case, it will be the play symbol. So if we run it, you can see here that we have a button that has the play symbol in it. And those are the most common things that you are going to do with QPushButtons. Thank you for watching. If you have a topic you want me to cover in a future video, please put it down in the comments. If you got value out of this video, please consider hitting the like button. And if you want to see more, please consider subscribing. And like all software made for movies, we test in production. Thank you, and I'll see you around.